The Syntax of Things by Arisha. Chapter 54. Parentheses. The Ministry's Fall. Every time Severus woke up with Harry's random parts glued on him, he promised himself it would be the last time. Every time he opened his eyes to see that face buried into the pillow next to his, while an arm or a leg was entangled around Severus, he swore to put an end to this decadency and move forward to a happy, independent life. As this was not an option, however, Severus watched himself falling and falling again, unable to find a good enough reason to stop this fall. Next time, he thought to himself, although he knew that he needed not another time to know that he should stop. The fact that Harry was at last sleeping normally should not be as strong an argument. The fact that Severus himself was sleeping better when the bed wasn't cold was outrageous. Sometimes the best and worst times of one's life could coincide. It was a talent of the soul to discover the joy and pain. But the bitterness burdened Severus's soul, and he found that he didn't know what to do with it. Until a solution presented itself, he carefully packed his guilt away and continued to obey and submit himself to the boy's desires. Not to all of them. Shut up! He turned to see Harry sleeping on his belly with the bedsheet up his waist, facing away from Severus. His breath was even. Severus's was far from it. His mark hadn't stopped burning all night, and he knew he'd be summoned any time now. The Dark Lord had already decided that taking Hogwarts was a priority, and no one knew the school as well as Severus. The Death Eaters would have to break in, and Severus would have to be the one to lead them. To his defense, he was once again forced to do as he was told. And apart from that, he was indeed going to have to betray the Order under Dumbledore's orders anyway. Not that Severus had any friends in the Order to lose. He had allies. To him, it was the same. And now another Weasley was getting married, and Harry would stubbornly want to attend. Between witnessing another Weasley wedding and killing Dumbledore, Severus definitely preferred the latter. And the wedding with a Vila it was, just to make sure that she'd get screwed as frequently as the tradition required to produce another dozen of brainless Weasleys. Giving birth was not something to be proud of. Getting married applied to that category too. Announcing one's love and expecting to be admired for it, for having succeeded at being absolutely ordinary, and having found a person amongst the billions of the earth to get along with for a reasonable amount of time. This was what animals did, and they were certainly not proud of it. Yawning, he reached the conclusion that he was glad he'd never been married. Sharing a life with someone else was not something he wished for. Having to share his secrets and give away his habits and desires for the sake of a random wife seemed terrifying to him. He could never stand not having a bed to himself. Except he could. Stretching once more, Severus made a much-too-needed trip to the bathroom before washing his face and pouring himself a cup of tea. The forgotten box of biscuits from yesterday's night lay on the mattress next to Harry's hand, and Severus quietly placed it on the nightstand. He sat back to the bed and pulled the glittery pink invitation out of his robes. Miss Fleur Delacour and Mr. Bill Weasley request the pleasure of your company at their wedding. He stopped reading and crumpled up the paper. It seemed that they'd have to survive their wedding without him then. Pity. It occurred to Severus that it must have been Molly's insistence that they invite him at all. His mark itched again, and he almost dropped his cup on the sheets. He winced as the pain became stronger, and Harry curled to his side, hissing, "Potter!" The boy clutched at his forehead, and Severus dragged him up to a sitting position. Harry pushed him away. "Let go! Ah! Fuck! Focus! Push him out!" Severus's mark throbbed. He had to go. "Ah! No! Focus!" Severus repeated. "Remember what I taught you." Harry's forehead fell forward on Snape's lap, and he screamed. Not knowing what to do, Severus stroked his back awkwardly. The screaming didn't stop. Harry's nails dug into his scar as though trying to remove it. Severus watched in terror the connection he had heard about, but had never seen this clearly before. Their souls connected. Harry was indeed the piece that had been missing from the Dark Lord's soul. They were one. Dark magic had been Severus's passion since he could remember himself. Even before Hogwarts, he'd fallen in love with its abilities and the lack of limits it provided to those who knew how to master and manipulate it. It wasn't art, he used to think, but it wasn't. It was power. It amazed Severus like nothing else. At this moment, it sickened him. Harry let a final sob on Severus's thigh and stopped. He helped himself to his feet and ran to the bathroom, where he closed the door and most likely wrenched his stomach out. Severus dressed himself and drank the rest of his tea in a gulp. When Harry came out of the bathroom, Severus was ready to depart. "I left a painkiller on the kitchen table, in case you need it," he said, taking a handful of flu powder. "Are you going to him?" asked Harry. Severus didn't look at him as he tossed the powder into the hearth. "Spinner's End."
"Where are they going to hide the boy next?"
"At the home of one of the Order," said Severus. He ran through the details of a plan that didn't exist and fixed his gaze with the Dark Lord's. At the front of his mind hovered the images he wanted him to see.
"Well, Huxley," the Dark Lord called, "will the Ministry have fallen by next Saturday?"
Severus knew where this was going. Put the Ministry down, the next task would be to kill Dumbledore. He kept his gaze calm, but the difficulty with which he was now keeping himself from burning the manor down and taking everyone with him had never been so great. He listened to everyone's plans and carefully packed them in his memory to convey to Dumbledore later.
"As long as Dumbledore is alive," the Dark Lord stopped to look at Severus for a second, "I cannot move forward. I want him dead. He protects the boy."
The truly scary thing about undiscovered lies was that they had a greater capacity to diminish people than exposed ones. They eroded Severus's strength, his self-esteem, his very foundation. Looking back, he couldn't think of a moment where he had truly been himself. Violently pulled back to reality, he decided that even a tiny bit of deceit was dishonorable when used for selfish or cowardly reasons. Still, manipulation itself was delightfully convenient all the time. All the same, he trusted his instinct upon maintaining the personality the Dark Lord wanted him to have and silently wished for this to end as soon as possible.
"I have been careless, and so have been thwarted by luck and chance, those records of all but the best laid plans. But I know better now. I understand those things that I did not understand before. I must be the one to kill Harry Potter, and I shall be."
"Are you really not going to come?" "I see no reason why I should." In all honesty, he saw, but this was his one and only protest against Dumbledore's grand idiocy, keeping Harry in a cage for his protection, but letting him out so he can go to a wedding. Reasonable to the very end. "Hermione and Ron thought I should use Polyjuice, but since I'm going with Dumbledore, I don't think I'll need it. What do you think?" "Polyjuice, which you learned how to brew by stealing from me." Harry glanced at it cheekily and put on his jacket. It occurred to Severus that he barely looked any older in it. "Ron's making a pretty decent effort to be all right with me now. It was stupid to think he would never talk to me again." Severus didn't roll his eyes. Making an effort to be all right with someone wasn't what he had in mind when he thought of a friendship. Then again, what did he know? Dumbledore apparated with a loud pop and smiled at them warmly. "And I'm so happy I'll be attending a wedding," smile. "And I have definitely not asked you to murder me anytime soon," smile. Severus nodded curtly and left the room with the flu just in time to save himself from the glorious scene of Albus Dumbledore teaching Harry Potter how to use a tie-tying spell. As soon as he stepped foot in his house, he ran to the shower, eager to rub off him, Harry's scent and Harry's feelings, and everything that could possibly remind Severus of him. Remembering his place in the world, he wore his Death Eater cloak and departed for the Malfoy Manor. Not for the first time. He wondered about the seemingly endless row of horrors that had fallen upon him since he began pretending to care for the boy. It was surely the most idiotic expectation of his to hope for the mere courtesy of self-respect. He brought to mind how he was always getting accustomed to situations, no matter if he liked them or not. He assisted Harry Potter because it was asked of him. Nothing intriguing or interesting pushed him to continue doing so, and so it had to be routine. Inwardly, he applauded himself for successfully keeping on hating the boy with all his heart. Outwardly, he forced his face to fall and let his expression become blank. After all this time of serving old greedy bastards, he finally had to care for himself, even if it was just a little. Dumbledore had been taking advantage of his love for Lily since the very day of her death. Severus was expected to remain unaffected, of course. He had to live up to the standards, didn't he? The heartless Slytherin bastard, the dirty fascist. He'd embodied this role so well, and had met everyone's expectations with no trace of sentiment slipping out. He'd be proud to state that he was planning to do so for the rest of his days. But that was impossible. People acted it to one another, all this hardness, but deep down they weren't like that. The Dark Lord himself had desires, and thus he had flaws. Dumbledore disagreed, but Severus believed that even Voldemort's heart contained emotions. One couldn't be out in the cold all the time. One had to come in from the cold. Well, not Severus. It occurred to him that this was against every theory he had developed over the past years. Not that what he believed mattered. Severus's job was to pry through the keyhole and transfer information. That was what servants did. Other people, not servants, not spies, not perplexed by inadmissible sentiments towards little disobedient children, did better. They fell in love, got engaged, planned weddings, and invited people like Severus, knowing far too well they'd not attend.
Severus, just in time.
My lord. The ministry has fallen. Scrimgeour is dead. They are coming. Harry pulled out his wand as he threw himself into the screaming crowd. His eyes frantically searched around for Dumbledore, but the headmaster was nowhere to be seen. Hermione seized Harry's arm, and she dragged him to the side. They both crouched and hid under the long linen tablecloth of a round table. Ron found them soon, too, and he dropped on his knees beside the panting heart. "Go!" Harry yelled at them. "It's not safe. You're not safe with me." "Not going anywhere," Ron said. Harry gripped Ron's arm tightly, silently begging him to listen to reason. "Find Ginny," he said, hoping against all hope that this at least would work. "And I'll find Dumbledore, all right? Go!"
"We mustn't split!"
Hermione yelled, but Harry shouldn't let them be near him, not in case he was targeted, attacked, caught. No one else could die for him again. No one else could suffer because of him again. "Harry!" Ron shouted as the tent behind them burst into flames, and a sharp explosion sound pierced their ears. Harry felt a steady, tight grip on his shoulder and turned around to see Dumbledore staring down at him expressionlessly. Be careful, he wanted to say to his friends, but he didn't have time. Dumbledore apparated them away. It took a lifetime for Harry to calm down. Dumbledore took him to the safe house and then left, promising to return soon. An hour passed, and Dumbledore did not appear. Snape didn't come either. Harry took a shower and let the hot water wash away his fear and anger. He checked the fireplace as soon as he got out of the bathroom, but it hadn't been used, and the fluid powder jar was sealed shut with a charm. Harry couldn't get out, so he had no way of knowing what was happening to the outside world. The possibility of both Snape and Dumbledore being dead ringed in his ears and made him sick. He imagined what it would be like remaining stuck and forgotten in this room until he died of hunger. He could not sleep. He watched the dawn as it illuminated with its red and gold shining. He was reminded of Gryffindor's colors, and of Hogwarts, and all the places he had no access to because he was locked up. His scar didn't hurt. He was alone. He drank what lemon juice was left in the fridge and discovered an old box of biscuits in the cupboard. His stomach was a knot, and after the first biscuit he felt nauseous. When the popping sound of apparition was heard, Harry jumped up and saw Dumbledore carrying a tired, grim expression. "Is everyone all right?" Harry asked at once. "Where's Snape? Hermione and Ron?" Dumbledore raised a hand to calm him down. "Everything is under control, Harry. Your friends are safe. They have been moved along with the rest of the Order, and as far as I'm aware, we had no losses. Voldemort has taken over the Ministry. Things are going to change." "Where's Snape?" Harry asked again. "Unknown." Harry closed his eyes and collapsed onto the bed. He rubbed his face with both hands. "He's with Voldemort," he muttered. Dumbledore placed a hand on Harry's back. "Severus is very capable of taking care of himself, Harry. I believe you know that." Harry nodded. He knew that. What he didn't know was if he could endure losing another person. "When is he coming back?" "Harry." Dumbledore didn't understand. No one did. Maybe Harry didn't even want them to. It didn't feel right for other people to know. "I don't want to discuss it, sir." "Severus puts his life at mortal risk for us," Dumbledore said calmly. "You are a man now, Harry, and I feel honored for having seen you grow up from the little boy you once were." Harry felt a faint smile taking form on his face, despite his distress. "I need you to think like a man and tell me if it is wise of you to feel so dependent on someone who would face grave danger. If anyone even knew that the two of you are close,
If an impulsion of friendship even is worth getting someone you care about into a bigger risk than he already is.
Harry felt the blood freeze in his veins.
He's a good legilimens,
he protested.
I don't feel dependent. Every time you two ignore my warnings, he gets closer to death.
Dumbledore said as a matter of fact, and Harry was suddenly perplexed about what to believe. If Dumbledore cared so much about Snape, he wouldn't have him spy on Voldemort. Of course, Voldemort's death mattered above all. Harry couldn't bring himself to argue. He shook his head.
I don't want anyone to die because of me ever again,
Harry said in a hushed voice, his head bowed.
Ever.
Dumbledore patted his back.
Then be careful.
He knew Dumbledore was right. He knew he should stop. But when Dumbledore departed and when another 15 hours passed before Snape appeared, Harry knew that he could not bring himself to stop. He remembered how Snape always accused him of not having control over the simplest things, but that didn't matter now, because the fire hearth was suddenly activated, and Snape walked quietly out of a thick cloud of smoke. And just like the arrogant little brat that Snape thought him to be, Harry bolted up from the bed and hugged him in despair, his arms curled around his neck, his weight on his toes, his voice hoarse as he said,
Where in the hell have you been all this time?
Snape allowed the hug to enclose him without protesting and grunted only when Harry didn't seem to have any intention of letting go. He finally pushed Harry away, and his black eyes peered at Harry's intently as he studied him. Harry grinned.
You're alive,
he said. Severus creased a brow. Why wouldn't I be?
Right.
Harry couldn't wait that grin from his face. He could tell that Snape was appalled by it, but he didn't care. He wanted to hug him again, tightly, and never leave him. Instead, he sat back on the bed and tried to reason his stupid heart.
Since you probably didn't come here in the middle of the night to teach me occlumency, I think you should stop trying to convince me that you're somehow angry again and just lie down,
he said as he slid under the sheets. Severus remained still for a long moment, as though considering his options and failing to find a window that would save him from this. At last he went off to the bathroom and closed the door behind him. Harry wanted to wait for him to come back, but after a minute he realized that he hadn't slept since the wedding, and the sound of Snape taking a shower or washing his face or whatever it was that he was doing was the most relaxing sound Harry had ever heard. He tried to keep his eyes open so he could sleep with the weight of Snape breathing beside him. Unable to do so, his heavy eyelids shut close, and the last sensible thought he had was that Snape would be shocked to find him grinning even in his sleep.